Neocon John Bolton went on CNN and he talked about Biden's drawdown in Afghanistan. And, of course, he trotted out all of his old, terrible arguments. But what I love here about this clip is the CNN host is barely trying, and she ends up running circles around him.
I don't think the risk of a terrorist attack from Afghanistan is going to come the day after Taliban takes back over. I do think it's going to take more time, and that's really what the risk is. I would rather defend innocent American civilians there than in the streets and the skies over America. And number two, there's another aspect to this. It's not just terrorism in Afghanistan. If Taliban takes back over, the hand of the extremist in Pakistan will be strengthened, and the risk of a Pakistani Taliban takeover of that government increases substantially, I think, unfortunately. And such a government would have control of dozens or scores of nuclear weapons, which everybody ought to be worried about. And we lose our ability to watch on the west of Afghanistan what Iran is up to. This was a central strategic position for the United States. We're giving it away. We're getting nothing in return.
But he still thinks that there are organizations, that there is intel in place that is going to prevent even what you were saying.
With all due respect, I don't think it's enough. There's simply no substitute for being on the ground and for not just the military forces that are there, but the other capabilities that we have that we can't sustain without the military being there.
So that is a forever war.
Well, I think the threat of terrorism is what we're talking about. It's not like American troops have been conducting a D-Day every day for the last 20 years. We have had foreign deployments since World War II for extended periods of time because it's in our national interest. The question isn't do you like the length of the war or not? The question is, what do you do to best protect America?
Americans don't want it.
Americans have not been given the arguments for the last 15 years.
Sir, they've been given all of the arguments.
No, they haven't. They have not. One of the ironies here is that opponents of our presence in Afghanistan have been able to convince people that we're there purely as an act of charity for the Afghans. And many Americans would say, okay, it's time for them to defend themselves. The fact is, we're there for Americans. And that point was not made by Trump for 4 years. Biden doesn't agree with it, and it wasn't made by Obama.
But they're listening to, for instance, the assessment of someone like General David Petraeus, who was well respected and was on the ground commanding U.S. forces there, and he doesn't agree with you on that. Well, so I guess my point is that the Americans have reason in an educated way, taking in the opinions of experts, to say, yes, that confirms that there should not be U.S. troops there.
That may be their opinion. I'm not disputing the survey is correct, but I'm saying I think the arguments have not been made by the top leadership of America long enough to be able to convince them. And when you have an absence of debate, it's very easy for people to get a misimpression. This is an act of national security malpractice, I think, both by the Trump and by the Biden administrations. And I fear greatly that it's innocent people who will pay the price.
Do you look back on the mistakes made during the Bush administration and realize that has a lot to do with why Americans think that this is not a good idea?
Well, I don't think they have necessarily thought through what's right and what's wrong about it. What was right was to strike al-Qaeda and to do the damage to it that we did. I think where we veered off in the wrong direction was nation building, whether it's in Afghanistan or Iraq. And I come back to my basic point. We're not there for them. We're there for us. We're not going to build their nation for them. They're going to build it. But whether we're deployed there, as whether we're deployed in Germany, South Korea, or Japan, depends on a judgment what's in our interest. And to give those positions up, I think, is a big mistake.
But what about the parallels between Afghanistan and Vietnam?
Well, I think the parallels that people are drawing are incorrect at this point. The issue we're talking about in Afghanistan is not continued combat operations. It's been a long time since it was seriously a war that involved American troops. What we're talking about is making sure that terrorists don't take sufficient base in Afghanistan or in Pakistan
you're trying to argue. You're trying to say that we, the U.S. You're trying to say the U.S. hasn't been at war in the conventional sense with the involvement of U.S. troops.
I'm saying the terrorist threat to the United States is not a conventional military threat, and it takes a different kind of response. And that's what we've been trying to do in Afghanistan. Saying, well, the Afghans have to defend themselves is a little bit like saying, well, the Belgians are going to have to defend themselves against the Germans. And if they can't, it's a European problem. It's a long way away. The issue is not the Belgians or the Afghans. The issue is what keeps America safest. And I think having deployments in Afghanistan and in Iraq to prevent the terrorists from getting sufficient sanctuary so they can plan and implement attacks on the United States or our friends and allies, very much in the interest of innocent American civilians.
Did the U.S. lose the war in Afghanistan?
No, I don't. I think we've walked away from it. I think it's a huge mistake.
How can you, walking away,
That's
how is that not, I mean, can you explain what you mean by that?
Because we weren't defeated.
John, what would victory even mean? What would it include? What goals would have to be met in order for John Bolton to say, yeah, we won? Notice something. anybody who's in favor of the Afghanistan war or the Iraq war, if you ask them to define what victory is, what goals need to be met for us to declare victory and get out, none of them have an answer. Not a single one of them has an answer. None of them. So they want us to stay at war with no defined goal or end game or end date. They just want to permanently be there. Notice at one point, they lied to us and they told us all these different reasons. Oh, we got to go to Iraq to get Saddam Hussein because he was working with Osama bin Laden. Well, number one, he wasn't working with Osama bin Laden, as we now know. Number two, homeboy's been dead for a really long time and we're still in Iraq. So maybe that reason you gave us was total bullshit and that wasn't the real reason. In Afghanistan, Al-Qaeda is being protected there and we think Osama's there, so we got to get Osama bin Laden. That's why we got to go. Mission accomplished on that one. Over a decade he's been dead and we're still there. According to our own intelligence agencies, as of years ago, there's less than 100 Al-Qaeda operatives in Afghanistan. So Al-Qaeda defeated there, check. Osama bin Laden dead, check. And we're still there. So now, what are the reasons now? What would victory mean? You would think that in the process of defending one of these wars, you would be smart enough to come up with even a bullshit reason as to why we have to stay there and what victory would mean and when we can get out. But he doesn't bother. He doesn't bother. Let's go through this. This is great. So at first he says, I would rather defend innocent Americans there than in the streets at home. Wait, hold on. So you're seriously arguing that what? Al-Qaeda operatives or ISIS are going to invade Alabama? What do you mean the streets at home? Who from Afghanistan is going to attack on the streets at home? Should St. Louis be concerned? What are you talking about? What does that mean? There's nobody in Afghanistan who has the operational capacity or the will to attack us here in the United States of America. For him to just casually say that, listen, you're not going to get this over on people. People know that there is no direct threat to the homeland of the U.S. from Taliban militants in Afghanistan who are using AK-47s from 1983. Who are you kidding? And by the way, the Taliban, they're a guerrilla army. They have territorial goals. They want to have the region of Afghanistan. That has nothing to do with Sacramento. I don't know what to tell you. Then he says, see, he contradicts himself a bunch and he goes back and forth. He has moments of honesty and then moments of the bullshit line. So he says, well, one of the reasons, this is about keeping Iran in check. So we're in Afghanistan to keep Iran in check? So then you lied to us. John Bolton, Bill Kristol, Paul Wolfowitz, George W. Bush, Dick Cheney, you just admitted you lied to us. If that's one of the real reasons we went in. Nobody said, hey, we got to go in to keep Iran in check. Maybe thousands of Americans have to die to keep Iran in check. If you told us that at the beginning, the support for the Afghanistan war would have been like 12%. You didn't tell us that because you know it's not popular, but now you admit it. And by the way, you probably accidentally admitted that. That's the stuff he normally says behind closed doors. But now he's saying it on CNN. There is a number of moments where the CNN host just checkmates Bolton, and he doesn't even realize it. So he describes it, and she's like, well, that's a forever war. You're defining what a forever war is. Checkmate. Then she says, another point she checkmates him, quote, all she said was, Americans don't want it. We're living in what's supposed to be a constitutional republic and a representative democracy. And the representatives are supposed to represent us. And Afghanistan is deeply unpopular. I told you guys, in like 2013, there was a poll that something like 13% or 19% of Americans still wanted to be in Afghanistan. I think now it was like 22% or some shit. So Americans don't want it. His response to that is, you can't make this up. Americans haven't been given the argument. You gave us 4 different arguments for the reason early on, and then since then, you haven't said anything because you just wanted to keep it going, and now you won't even define victory. Could you imagine saying that? You gave us 4 reasons, and you moved the goalposts every time. Osama bin Laden. Okay, check. Al-Qaeda. Okay, check. The women and girls or something in Afghanistan. They just keep moving the goalposts every single time. What they don't tell you is, he said the thing about Iran here, but they don't tell you about the military-industrial complex and how war is incredibly profitable for these defense contractors. They don't tell you about the trillions of dollars of mineral wealth in Afghanistan. They don't tell you about the opium. They don't tell you about the oil in Iraq. I can go on and on. Then Bolton says, we're there for Americans. How about you fix Flint, Michigan's water for Americans? How about that? The nerve to say we need to be in Kabul and Kandahar for Americans. You need to be in Flint, Michigan fixing that poisoned water and those pipes. That's what you need to do. If you care about Americans, you need to, make it so that up to 60,000 people don't die from lack of health care. That's something you could do for Americans. You could fix our infrastructure, which, depending on the year, gets a grade of D+ or C-. You should do that for Americans. We got to be in Kandahar for Americans. Could you imagine saying that to a single mother who can't pay the bills? Or any of the 540,000 people who are homeless now? And that number shot up because of COVID, by the way. Probably added over 100,000 new people who are homeless. There's still evictions going on, even though there's a nominal eviction moratorium. Go tell that person, I got to be in Kandahar. I'm sorry, I can't help you. We can't cut you a check. We can't get you a job. Because we got to be in Kabul and Kandahar. What do you want me to say? Then he says, hey, it was right to strike Al-Qaeda. Even if you believe that, mission accomplished, so come home. Even if you believe that. I don't think anybody would have begrudged you in the wake of 9/11 if you had a very narrow and specific and defined goal of get Osama bin Laden and destroy Al-Qaeda. But you got 2 years to do it. If that were the rules, I think most people, over 90% of Americans, would have been like, go right ahead. But again, guess what? It took longer than 2 years, but Osama is dead, and now Al-Qaeda is destroyed in Afghanistan. So there you go. Even if you think that's right, to strike Al-Qaeda, well, why are we still there? It doesn't make any sense to still be there. And probably my favorite point was, what about the parallels with Vietnam? Because yes, what John Bolton doesn't understand is that history's a tough judge, bro. History's a tough judge. So now you might still come up with all these bullshit rationalizations, but in 30 years, I mean, these guys are going to be looked at as monsters of history. George W. Bush, Dick Cheney, John Bolton. I mean, this is what we have here is an illegal and an offensive war against a country that didn't attack us, where hundreds of thousands of innocent civilians died. And we broke a region, which then in turn led to the rise of ISIS. Ironically, the opposite of the thing they said they wanted, right? We want to get the jihadists. Well, now there are more jihadists as a direct result of your actions. Torture. No habeas corpus, no due process. That's how these guys are going to be remembered. And, just like now we all know Daniel Ellsberg was a hero for the Pentagon Papers. In 30 years, it's almost already totally unanimous, but in 30 years, it's going to be rock solid. You guys are all war criminals, and you deserve to rot away in a prison cell. And he doesn't see it, and he's still arguing to stay there with no end in sight. And finally, he says, it's about making sure terrorists can't attack the United States. Well, now you're on what number reason is this, right? Again, during the course of the war, for the last half of the war, nobody even bothered discussing what's victory, what are the goals, and all that stuff. But for the first half of the war, they just had 4 or 5 different reasons, and they kept changing it year to year, right? Here's why we're there. No, now here's why they're there. No, now here's why they're there. And then just dropped it at a certain point. So now we're on, which number is this thing that, we're talking about as to why we're there. If you really think, oh my God, it's about stopping terrorists attacking the United States, cut off all arming and funding of Saudi Arabia right this second. John. But you don't want to do that. In fact, you were part of multiple administrations that helped the Saudis and armed them. Gave them money. You say you want to make sure terrorists can't attack the United States of America. But we are top allies with the chief exporter of radical Islam around the world. That particular strain of Islam, Salafi Islam, Wahhabi Islam, that particular ideology, extremist Sunni fundamentalism, that's what Saudi Arabia pushes around the world. Saudi Arabia has armed jihadists both in Syria on the ground and in Yemen on the ground. We are aiding and abetting a genocide in Yemen. We've given them multi-billion-dollar weapons deals. Even Donald Trump, who pretended like I'm Mr. Tough on radical Islam, he aided and abetted it by giving Saudi Arabia money and multi-billion-dollar weapons deals. So, the nerve of these guys to say it's about making sure terrorists can't attack the United States. And then propping up the worst offender that could lead to terrorism. By the way, how many of the hijackers? What is it, 16 of the 19 hijackers or something were Saudi Arabian? We didn't invade Saudi Arabia when 9/11 happened. Weird. It's almost like they had places and they already had plans to invade certain places, and they just sort of pretended like, well, 9/11 gives us the green light to attack these places because they're responsible or something, even though we now know they're not responsible. It's tough. When you watch a guy like John Bolton, you wonder. You do wonder. How much of his own bullshit is he buying? Is he just a complete liar? He's up there lying and he knows he's lying through his teeth? Or has he convinced himself all this stuff is real? Because I don't understand how he can work around that concrete fact in his head and rationalize it. That, I want to protect America from terrorists, which is why I'm funding terrorists. The U.S. has helped fund jihadists on the ground in Syria. The U.S. helped fund jihadists back when it was the Mujahideen under Ronald Reagan. We armed Saudi Arabia. Even the concern, the women and girls in Afghanistan, he didn't give that reason here, but there have been a number of people who have given that reason. It's a new reason why they say we have to stay in Afghanistan. Look at women and girls in Saudi Arabia. They have no rights. They got to cover from head to toe. They weren't allowed to drive. People are beheaded in the public square for adultery and sorcery and witchcraft, drug smuggling. Don't pretend like you care about human rights when that's one of your best friends. So anyway, really great job from the CNN host there. She spoke for like 10% of the time and still somehow ran circles around him. Amazing.